Dear learners, I welcome you all to this session on the role of women led NGOs in promoting women entrepreneurship. It is an indisputable fact that entrepreneurship, and more specifically, women entrepreneurship, has become the essential catalyst for economic development, societal health, and well being, and thereby has attracted the attention of policymakers, researchers, and practitioners in the field. Before we discuss the role of women led NGOs in promoting women entrepreneurship, we need to understand the distinctiveness of women entrepreneurship. Because obviously, when it comes to women being there as business owners, as the ones who are holding control over entrepreneurial ventures, the journey is not the same. The journey becomes difficult, at times interesting also, and is also full of challenges. You must have understood by now that entrepreneurship in itself has abundance of possibilities to promote economic development, generate economic sustainability, and strengthen individuals and communities. However, one needs to take into consideration the specific context in which entrepreneurship occurs, thrives, and also faces challenges. When it comes to the Indian context, the country has witnessed surge in women entrepreneurship in the recent past. According to Global Women Entrepreneurial Leaders Scoreboard 2015, India ranked among the lowest countries on certain key dimensions relating to women entrepreneurship, such as business environment, access to resources, leadership skills, legal rights, entrepreneurship pipeline, etc. And there are many such indices, and the ranking of our country on those indices have resulted in a number of government initiatives to foster entrepreneurial environment. One also needs to understand the complex landscape of women entrepreneurship in India, where one size does not fit all, which means that the unique needs of women entrepreneurs situated differently across different regions, class, abilities, competencies, social, cultural, educational background, all these factors need to be addressed while framing policies or taking a particular initiative. And these initiatives, there are different stakeholders involved in the process, and the initiatives are taken by them in different capacities in different ways. Research in women entrepreneurship. This is something which is, very interesting, because research constitutes the backbone of knowledge production, the backbone of our understanding on various issues, and it is also contested. It is also full of challenges. There are different theories, there are theoretical perspectives, there are different kinds of methodologies which are being adopted in different disciplines. But yes, one thing that is common, and the idea is that the word of research and the real world and the connect between the two is usually contested on different parameters. However, research in any field holds significance not only in terms of contributing to the process of knowledge production, but rather it also informs practice and policy formulation, as well as reflects ground realities. The same is the case with the research in women entrepreneurship, or we can say in general in the field of entrepreneurship, And when we are specifically talking about women entrepreneurship, then also the research indicates that there is no elephant in entrepreneurship. What does this mean? This means that the various topics in the field of entrepreneurship do not constitute a congruous whole. Therefore, the issues faced by women entrepreneurs also get different depending upon the situatedness of the entrepreneur. These issues vary from financial, structural, socio-cultural, networking, legal and technical hassles, etc. Now, where do we place NGOs in this entire discourse? So, NGOs play a substantial role in filling in these gaps. And here we can take into consideration Katz and Gartner's 4 key variables: entrepreneurial intention, assembling resources, creating organizational boundaries, and exchanges of resources across organizational boundaries. And NGOs pitch in at these different levels, be it at the level of individuals through creating entrepreneurial intention and drive among them, or creating interventions at the level of processes, and also working at the level of organizations and creating enabling environment to foster entrepreneurial spirit and the ability to deal with the challenges among women aspirants who wish to become entrepreneurs. Now, the NGOs that we have started our discussion on, so these NGOs form a crucial part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And this ecosystem includes a number of other factors. It gets constituted with the help of a number of other factors such as finance, public policy, markets, human capital, people and institutions with the knowledge and resources to help entrepreneurs. Intersectionality become very important here. And there are, apart from the intersectionality of the entrepreneur who is in discussion or who we are talking about, the specific case which gets different depending upon the situatedness which we have discussed earlier, there does exist intersections facilitating interaction of people, ideas and resources. And culture. Culture also constitutes an important part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, because culture can either inhibit, culture can either restrict the expansion, the growth, the possibility of the success of women entrepreneurs, or culture can do otherwise also. Culture can promote, culture can enable, it can facilitate. So culture that is rich in social capital and focused on common good is also very important. And all these factors facilitate and support the creation and growth of new ventures. And it's not only about the creation, it's also about the sustenance, the slow, gradual expansion, which is very important. For women, significant gaps persist within the entrepreneurial ecosystem in terms of access to finance and markets, networking, mentorship, acquisition of necessary skills, and awareness of legal and regulatory mechanisms. The existing research indicates that the traditional entrepreneurship ecosystem models are gender blind and instead proposes a 5M framework, which includes money, markets, management, motherhood, and macro-meso environment. This framework examines how factors like access to finance, market opportunities, human capital, family context, and the broader social environment can differently impact women entrepreneurs as compared to men. Because, we all are situated, we all are placed differently in the socio-cultural context in which we are living in. And depending upon our placing, depending upon our positioning, our access to resources or our denial of resources, it happens at different levels and in different capacities. The intensity, the extent also gets different depending upon who I am, who are we, who am I, and who am I determines what will I get, what facilities, what resources, what kind of environment, be it the enabling environment or not so enabling environment, it all somewhere is dependent on my positioning, on my identity, or on our identity, if you're talking about an individual or whether we are talking about a particular group. So it all gets, we need to understand these nuances, we need to understand these subtle intricacies of the social order. Because be it entrepreneurship or be it any other phenomena which we are talking about, it is, it doesn't exist, it doesn't happen in isolation, it is happening in a particular given social context. So here the role of NGOs, specifically women-led NGOs, become crucial, as these organizations have the possibilities to understand women's specific challenges, in a more better, clear manner. These organizations which are led by women, there are chances, there does exist this possibility that they have a better, clear, more nuanced understanding of the challenges that women entrepreneurs come across, might face, and thus they address them incorporating the contextual factors. For instance, in the 2023, I'll quote this study, and this is not the only one, there are a number of other studies as well. But this 2023 study of Doa Althalathini and Hefa A. Telias, titled Of Resistance to Patriarchy and Occupation Through Virtual Bazaar, the authors explore how institutional context and digital technologies influence women's entrepreneurship in conflict-laden Palestine, where obviously now we all are witnessing that the context has completely got changed. But this is the study got published in 2023, and it tells us about the kind of that how the institutional context, be it the occupation or be it the societal norms, and how do these factors shape and construct the possibilities of the success of women entrepreneurs in the conflict-laden context of Palestine. So the context becomes very important. A number of such studies highlight the importance of context, situatedness, and intersection of a number of parameters which constitute differences in the challenges and struggles of women entrepreneurs, compelling the NGOs to adopt tailored strategies. The enabling potential of women-led NGOs. The GEM conceptual models suggest GEM is Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. We have several reports with the name of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor reports. So the conceptual model of this particular report suggests that the socio-cultural and political context within a country must foster conditions which can generate not only the opportunities for entrepreneurship, but also the capacity skills, and motivation required for it to succeed. Women-led NGOs contribute in reconstructing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. This reconstruction becomes really important, because when we see, we need to reinvestigate, reconstruct, revisit wherever we find flaws. So where women entrepreneurs, the ecosystem, we need to reconstruct in such a way that women entrepreneurs are given special attention to nurture their entrepreneurship potential. The distinct feature of these NGOs lies in the fact, and this specificity becomes really important, because they mobilize the local resources. We need to understand where are these NGOs located. They are placed in different cities, in towns, in villages also. So we find that in different regions, we have NGOs working in Rajasthan as well, we have NGOs working in Kerala. So the geographic, the demographic factors of these two states are not the same. So NGOs incorporate these differences, and depending upon the differences, not only in the context but also differences in the needs of people which are obviously related to the context, NGOs frame their own strategies. So the distinctiveness of these NGOs lies in the fact that they mobilize the local resources, and then with the help of these local resources, they provide access to finance, skill training, keeping in mind obviously the specific needs, enhancement of managerial abilities, leadership skills, constant support. This constant support is very important because they are placed in those settings, the NGOs, and then obviously women entrepreneurs, they also belong. There is this possibility, chances that they belong to the same location, and then obviously this constant support can be managed, can actually be made effective. Marketing, networking, access to legal and regulatory mechanisms, because often these legal and regulatory mechanisms, due to their complexity, they become a hurdle. They instead, they act as one of those factors which inhibit the growth of women entrepreneurs. So the NGOs work, provide support in all these areas. The development of entrepreneurial competencies is done through establishing collaboration with personal, social, and environmental factors. NGOs also provide linkage to formal banking institutions. Lobbying and advocacy is also done by these NGOs in framing gender-sensitive policies and laws. And here we can take example. There are a number of instances during 1970s, 80s. We found that, and then the organizations were there. And then in 1990s onwards, we found that we had those funded NGOs also, and the growth and expansion of NGOs, and which led to the concept of NGOization. So we had this particular organization, and the role the organization played, the name of the organization is Sakshi, which is an NGO led by Naina Kapoor. And the organization filed a public interest litigation along with other organizations like Jagori, etc. and under the collective platform of Vishakha. So it led to the passage of, it culminated in the passage of Vishakha guidelines in 1997. We all are familiar with Vishakha guidelines because those guidelines proved effective in managing, in preventing, in prohibiting sexual harassment of women at workplace. So this case, and behind Vishakha guidelines, we had a woman named Bhavri Devi, who was gang raped and who worked as a sathin in the Rajasthan Women's Development Project. And there she had tried to intervene child marriage of a girl who was less than a year old, who was almost 9 months. at that time when this marriage was taking place. So she intervened, and as what had happened later, that she was gang raped by uh, 5 men who belonged to that family. Okay, so what had happened, that this case, and Bhavri Devi is still fighting, her case is still pending, but as a result, what had happened, that public interest litigation was filed by this, under this collective name Vishakha. So the case reveals how a tiny stone thrown in the silent water can create ripples and can create history. So the journey that was started by Bhavri Devi, it finally led to the enactment of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. And we know that this is this phenomena, this case in itself becomes really important for women entrepreneurs also, because the safety and security at workplace becomes one of those crucial factors which ensures not only efficiency but also the dignity of the individual. And obviously it tells us in what kind of society are we living in. So in addition to this, all these things that I mentioned right now, NGOs can also provide access to education, information, training, resources, microcredit by organizing, a number of linkages, facilitating linkages, organizing workshops, awareness programs, etc. Challenges faced by women-led NGOs. These challenges are very important because we need to understand the fact that NGOs which are led by women and are working on women's issues operate in a patriarchal construct, where deeply entrenched societal and cultural norms put hurdles in the path of both these NGOs and also the women entrepreneurs that they are targeting, they are dealing with. So and this happens more especially in those settings where challenging these norms become more difficult. For instance, we have this study by Beena Agrawal, and she points out that women in rural settings in South Asia face more restrictions in terms of mobility and their access to resources such as land and other forms of, be it movable or immovable property. Here it also needs to be underlined that land is not only a productive asset, rather it has become, it has not become, rather it has symbolic significance which is connected with prestige, power, rootedness, and thereby we see that women actually, when it comes to land, so they might have ownership in some instances, but there remains a huge gap between ownership and control over resources, and here we are specifically talking about land. So the women-led NGOs often come across funding constraints, political opposition, societal barriers, etc. Overcoming these challenges requires sustained efforts, because this is not the story of a day. Actually it is a gradual process which requires commitment, which requires sustained efforts, such as awareness programs, training sessions, where community engagement becomes very important. Involvement of community members is essential to bring change and challenge deep-seated prejudices. Now, I'll quickly take one example. We have this organization, NGO Awake, Association of Women Entrepreneurs of Karnataka, which got established in 1983. So, as a growing network of business women, the organization offered entrepreneurship development training, entrepreneurship awareness programs, skill training workshops, and a number of other such initiatives. And to provide stimulus, business counseling is done as an entry point, where one-to-one business counseling, sector-specific counseling, counseling in rural areas are provided to aspiring women. Awake has taken a number of initiatives for startups, for sustenance and providing support to women entrepreneurs. through a number of initiatives such as trainers training programs, rural entrepreneurship development programs, and then it also has its own membership services. It has research and resource center and credit referral programs also. Apart from Awake, we have other organizations such as we have Seva, which is actually where the terrain gets a little bit different, because Seva is a registered trade union, but its contribution in promoting women's entrepreneurship is really significant. It has, it is working for unorganized workers. The motto is organizing the unorganized. So there is this one concept which is very important, and since we are discussing the role of NGOs as an enabler to promote women entrepreneurship, so as a learner we also need to be familiar with the ideas espousing conflicting viewpoints about NGOs. Arundhati Roy argues that funded NGO boom began in India in late 1980s and 90s, which coincided with trade liberalization, deregulation and privatization. And at the time, Indian state was gradually and partially withdrawing from rural development, agriculture, energy, transport, public health, public employment, etc. So with states increasing withdrawal, NGOs moved in to work in these areas. But what had happened that mostly these NGOs were funded by Western governments or international financial institutions. So apparently it seemed that these NGOs are filling the vacuum created by the state, reiterating state. However, in reality, these NGOs are accountable to their funders. So the author argues that these organizations, what do they actually do? They diffuse political anger and thus depoliticize the resistance, interfering with local people's agency and movement. So when we are talking about NGOs and their role in promoting women entrepreneurship, we also need to be very cautious while analyzing their impact in realizing the potential, the possibilities that are there in women entrepreneurs. We need to take into account these ideas also, which present a conflicting narrative. Thank you so much. I hope that you have understood the ideas that we tried to discuss today. Thank you.